Welcome to the Homecoming at the Esri User Conference presented by NorthStar and Blacks in GIS. Just a bit about Blacks in GIS and NorthStar. Blacks in GIS is a network platform of like-minded Black GIS professionals. And Blacks in GIS believes that through networking, we can discover endless possibilities. And you can join by following the link on the screen. My name is Clinton Johnson, and I use he, him, and his pronouns. I'm the founder and leader of one of the leaders of NorthStar, a community organization working to advance equity and belonging for people of the Black or African diaspora in GIS, geography, and beyond. And we do so in three ways. We work to increase networking and collaboration. We work to raise awareness of opportunities in GIS, not just career opportunities and educational opportunities, but also opportunities that GIS holds to improve communities. And one of the ways that we really are hyper-focused on helping folks use GIS to improve communities is to promote and enable folks to use GIS for the purpose of increasing equity. Part of the reason why there's a racial equity unified team at Esri right now is because NorthStar, in collaboration with the Weekend group, we advocated for our customers, and we helped us get to the point where we could build a whole practice around this. And there are a number of ways that you can connect with NorthStar. There's an atlas that we've newly taken out of beta, and we encourage people of African descent and or of African or the Black diaspora to add yourself to the atlas. We want to meet all of you digitally, if not in person. And we encourage everyone, anyone at all, who believes in the importance of increasing equity and belonging for people of the Black or African diaspora in GIS. We encourage all of you to join us, follow us on social media. You can follow us on LinkedIn. All of our handles are essentially GIS NorthStar. You can stay in touch through our mailing list. You can find us online and in all of the spaces using GIS NorthStar. Our URL is gisnorthstar.org, and our social media handles are GIS NorthStar. And I'll actually pause here for a few seconds to let folks capture the URLs using QR codes. And there's a QR code for Blacks in GIS and 3 links for NorthStar that should get you to everything else. As we talk about what the homecoming is, the first thing I want you to understand is that we are a network of networks collaborating to try to do as much as we can to advance equity and belonging for people of the Black or African diaspora. And we've got a number of sponsors that are investing in us in a number of ways to help us get to where we are. Critigen, Unity and Power, Adhere Technologies, NorthStar, of course, Spatial GIS, and African Women in GIS. All of us collaborating together very often with other groups like Black Voice Media to just bring more and more content to people who look like us. And so we designed the homecoming with the idea of connecting folks to foster community and equity for people of the African diaspora around and during the Esri User Conference. It has long been a time of year when Black people from all over the world have an opportunity to come together around our shared interest of geography, GIS, and related disciplines, and at the same time, find opportunities to connect around the conference. And so we've literally wrapped a series around the conference. And this year, our theme has been creating and innovating through and beyond the pandemic, recognizing that we have had quite a year and a half since the pandemic began. All of us have been trapped inside and dealing with all kinds of issues. And for some of us, those issues have intensified other pre-existing quote unquote conditions. And while for many, the past year was a time of racial reckoning and recognizing that racial injustice is at issue, NorthStar, Blacks in GIS, Unity and Power, Here Technologies, all of our sponsors have long known that these have been issues, and we are constantly trying to help do something about it and empower people. So we thought that we would highlight all throughout our series, highlight folks who have throughout the pandemic been creating and innovating, creating in place in whatever role that you're in, creating in terms of building and strengthening entrepreneurial efforts and innovating, bringing creative techniques and approaches to solving some of the most compelling challenges of our time lately. And then thinking about what comes next. So we've had a robust series. We started over the weekend with a happy hour and a welcome sort of keynote opening up the whole week. Throughout the week, we've had African women in GIS holding a research symposium. There was a conversation that we call Careers in GIS. GIS can look like you, recognizing that not only can it look like us, it does look like us. We're here. And I'm sure that we are here in numbers today and happy about it. The education spotlight, one of the people responsible for the education spotlight is one of our speakers today, and I'm excited to have them share their journey and their story with you. They took us on quite an adventure the other night, and be sure to check out the recordings of all of these things on our YouTube channels. I should have shared a link to that too. There was African nations focused happy hour time slot, so that people who are in the GMT 0 through 3 time zone can connect around this time. And there was also a happy hour sort of centered around the Americas time zones. We also had a bit of a, almost not quite a workshop, but we had some folks who do a lot of presenting, share their tips and ideas for how you get prepared for presenting and how you actually execute when you're presenting and building out your presentations. And that's something that I think everybody should check out when they get a chance. David Padgett, Dr. David Padgett from Tennessee State University, him and some of his students and other colleagues, they walked us through one of these really important projects that they've worked on with drone technology and GIS to highlight and uncover some important history and context around a place called Africatown. And I encourage you all to check that out. And here we are today. I don't know why the arrows on tips for presenting on big stages, because we're actually at the homecoming. And this has been a part of a series of events and discussions all throughout today. One of the things that's important to us as an organization is, NorthStar and Blacks and GIS is not just to try to make strides on our own, but we've collaborated with groups represented on the slide here to try to create more and more space for conversations about diversity and inclusion, belonging and equity, justice, racial healing, all throughout the conference today. And this is the last big conversation that we'll have. And we've got a great group of people here to talk to you about their journey, their adventure, some of the things that they've done over the past year and a half. And I'm just excited for you to meet them and learn more about them and their work. Before we get there, though, just a brief note: speakers in this session will talk about issues of racial injustice. And they're talking about these things as they happen in communities in general. And we're also talking about racial injustice in the workplace, which may include descriptions of bias and bigotry and hate. But as I'm sure many of you know, solving problems begins with defining those problems. Therefore, real and sometimes very critical and raw conversations about these issues are necessary. So today, I'm going to, do some introductions of our speakers. In fact, I'll let them introduce themselves, and so you can learn more about them and how they got into GIS. We'll talk about, we'll share some reflections from our speakers on their work and their perspectives on these interesting times. Then we'll get a demo, a presentation from one of our speakers on a project that they call the capture of urban emotions. One of our speakers will discuss a new app that they've created to capture and share human experiences and emotions. And then finally, our speakers will share their thoughts about what's next in GIS. And after all of this, we'll try to make some time for Q&A, and be sure to share your questions in the chat right now, all throughout, and we'll try to get to them as we move along. So getting into introductions. So I'm just going to ask a few questions of our speakers. First up, I want to ask each of you to take a few moments to share a bit about yourself. Tell us about your role and how long you've been in GIS. And I want to start with Kevin, if I can.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good.
Good. My name is Kevin Carrington. I am the founder and president of the C3 Initiative. I get to be a kid all day long, and I get to work with our K through 12 kids at getting them prepared for to solve the solutions of tomorrow. Our goal at C3 Initiative is to unlock the STEM potential that sits inside of the minds of our children all over the country. And I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Clinton.
Appreciate that, Kevin. Dr. Waka, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how long you've been in GIS and what your role is. You may be on mute.
Thank you, Clinton. Hello, thank you, everybody, and I'm so happy to be here. My name is Dr. Vachta. I am an architect and urban designer from training, and I'm also a geospatial expert. So I will say I have 3 hats. I'm actually the founder of GeoEdugaming. GeoEdugaming is this company that I created last year, where I'm actually bringing GIS education and also game into the 21st century design education. As a designer, I think about how to design. So I am also a researcher at EFCO Paris. I actually research, it's an urban design lab that actually deals a lot with systemic design. We also do projective ecology, and we also look at therapeutic approach to design. So how do we actually find healing ways of designing? And that also involves a lot the human experience. How long have I been in GIS? I've been in GIS for 7-8 years. And really, my coming into GIS was, I was at the point in my career where I was really fed up with the way I did things in design, working, without knowing I was actually using the idea or the theory of GIS, but I didn't use the tool. So a colleague actually referred me to City Engine, and it's how I got into GIS. So
really cool. And as we listen to all these stories and hear the diverse, first of all, ways into GIS, but also the diverse ways in which people show up or exist and operate in GIS and in this space. In fact, Dr. Waka is one of our most consistent participants and supporters, and has often reminded us that it is our differences that are our value, right? And we know this, and we know that's why we have this group. But all too often people focus a lot on the things that we have in common, which make a lot of sense, and they definitely unite us. But we believe that it's those things that are different about us that strengthen those bonds and make us collectively stronger, and it's how we magnify ourselves beyond the sum of our parts. I wonder if we can have Ray Johnson come on and introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their role and how long they've been in GIS.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ray Johnson, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs. And I am actually a writer at Esri, so I am not a GIS expert by any means. I do not claim to be. But I like to say that I've been GIS adjacent for about 1.5 years due to the COVID-19 crisis.
Appreciate that, Ray. And I think a lot of folks in the audience will really appreciate how important narrative and storytelling and writing is to GIS, to data science, and the like. Dr. Paget, maybe you can come on and introduce yourself and tell us what your role is and how long you've been in GIS.
Yes, I'm Dr. David A. Padgett, Associate Professor of Geography at Tennessee State University. I'm also the director and founder of the Geographic Information Sciences Lab at Tennessee State University, which is one of our illustrious HBCUs located in Nashville, Tennessee. I took my first GIS course in 1986, and I soon afterwards graduated and started working for the federal government using old GIS programs such as GRASS that I don't even think exists anymore. And so from there I went to Oak Ridge National Lab and developed other GIS applications, primarily related to Superfund sites and hazardous waste sites. And so that's where I got my start in the mid to late 1980s and into the early 1990s.
Appreciate that, Dr. Padgett. HBCUs are the cornerstone, the bedrock. They are the source. They are the fertile ground. They nurture and they deliver to the world some of the strongest talent in all areas of life. And now I wanna ask one of my partners in justice, Dorothea Cooper, to come on and share a bit about herself.
Absolutely. Hey, Clinton, glad to be here. I'm Dorothea Cooper. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a content delivery and operations manager at Here Technologies, where I manage the publication and delivery of our products to our internal and external customers. I'm also co-leader of Unity Empower, our employee resource group for people of African descent at Here. I've been in GIS for 17 years and collaborating, or as Clinton mentioned, his justice and, what did you call me, partner in justice? I've been collaborating for 2 years around the UC and the homecoming, so I'm glad to be back. Thanks.
We're glad to have your help, and as always, and to have your energy and your insight and input. And maybe I should have asked this first, but I want to challenge you all to think about, in 3 words or less, what would you say brought you into GIS? And I'm going to start by saying I think I could say it was a happy accident. I could say bumping into it, but just, really simply, I want people to think about, like, in the simplest terms, like how they got here. Because I think very often it feels like there's one story for how you get into GIS, but I'm wondering if there are any interesting patterns here. So maybe share your own 3 words, or maybe you identify with the happy accident or bumping into it. And maybe this time we'll start with Christine.
Thank you, Clinton. I think that I will say that my getting into GIS was really that I was lost and I had to either break or do something else, and I found GIS.
I was lost. I had to break or do something else. How about you, Dr. Padgett?
3 words, a faculty advisor. I was in my last year of school. I've been running track since I was 6 years old. I've done it all, Junior Olympics, AAU, and I was in my last year. I was trying to make nationals. I could see myself in the Olympics. I didn't want to take anything but easy classes my last year. And my faculty advisor said, Paget, you've got to get into this thing called Geographic Information Systems. I said, that sounds difficult. I need to get back on the track. I need to keep running. And he finally convinced me to take the class, and it changed my life, obviously.
That's incredible. That's really great. How about you, Kevin? What are your 3 words here?
My 3 words are I love tech, period. and so if it's tech, I'm gonna find it. I'm a gadget guy, I'm a tech guy, I'm an analytics guy. And my dad was an electrical engineer growing up and an entrepreneur. And so I've always been around tech. Tech has always been in my space. But it wasn't until college when we had to do an assignment. One of my undergraduate degrees is in computer information systems. We had to do an assignment, and for I grew up, I'm part of the West Indian diaspora. And so anyone who can identify, your parents con you into believing you are better than everyone else in the world and have to do more all the time. And so it was a presentation I was doing in college. I stumbled on some geographical information and used it in my in a project I had to present, and blew the teacher's mind, blew classmates' minds, and after that I was hooked. So that's how I bumped into it.
I appreciate all of that. I guess I want to say two things to that. Jack Dangerman talks about how GIS is sort of a unifier for all the sciences. It brings everything together. I also, and people also talk about GIS as a unifier of all different kinds of data. I also think about it as a unifier of all different kinds of tech. You could do any kind of tech work in the realm of GIS. How about you? I'm sorry. How about you, Ray? What are your 3 words?
I would say got extra curious. My former employer at Milwaukee County government used Esri software, GIS, to explore some really interesting points around COVID-19 and race and health equity in our community.
Yeah, I met Ray through some of that work, and have been, just excited to meet them, and to know them, and to see them now be a part of the Esri family has been such a joy. Dorothea, how about you? What are your 3 words?
I actually have 2 words, a kite. Yeah, let me tell you about it. So I have a fascination with kites, and I attended a career fair at Navy Pier my last year of undergrad, and there was a company called NAVTech, Navigation Technologies. They're now Here Technologies. They had a large booth. It was very crowded, and they were giving away kites. So I, went over to the booth, dropped off my resume, grabbed a kite, and received a call back. So when you hear GIS is for everyone, I'm everyone. I just stumbled into it.
That is an amazing story. I really do love the diversity of these pathways into GIS. One of which maybe a few of them have included people who in some way inspired, were a mentor, were a support. And I want you all to really talk about how, as you made your journey into and as you've been making it through GIS, where did you find support, guidance, and sponsorship? And this time I'll start with my partner in justice, Dorothea.
Yeah, what's amazing is, when I started my GIS journey, support and guidance came very easily. I'm a curious person, I'm going to talk to people and ask help and ask questions. So the support and guidance was there. Regarding sponsorship, that was like another level. So receiving sponsorship is something that is, I didn't feel was available or accessible. It was more so like earned, like I had to prove myself in one way or another before anyone could vouch or share their network with me to help me get to another level in my career. So support and guidance, absolutely. I had, line managers, peers, just willing to provide support and guidance. So yeah.
You know what, actually, I'm going to follow up immediately on that and add this to the mix for everybody else sort of answering this question. So as you think about finding that support and guidance, I've definitely experienced times where it seems like, to something that you said, Dorothea, someone else was immediately accepted, embraced, and supported and sponsored. And when they failed, someone gave them more resources so they could, just continue to do better. And when they failed there, maybe they got promotions. I want you all to also share, as you think about, that journey and where you found support and guidance, also think about things that you may have learned from navigating spaces where maybe you were the only Black person, or the only person of your gender, or heaven forbid, the only person of your gender identity and Black. So, I don't know, Dorothy, if you wanted to add anything there before moving on.
And I've experienced, being the only one of my gender and race and identity in a room, right? often. So I've learned not to become invisible to make others comfortable. That's like my key, you know, where I am, I belong. My perspective is of value, and I'm here to contribute just like everyone else. So.
Kevin, real quick, I want to go to you because you also have a, you know, like Dorothea and myself with NorthStar and Unity and Power, you also sort of have a mission of increasing the space for making more space for Black and brown children in particular when it comes to tech. So how have you find sponsorship and guidance in your journey, and what are some of the ways that you've in navigating that space learned about dealing with being the only?
Yeah. I often find myself, what I call people is my alter ego, my day job. I'm a hospital administrator for a local hospital, and I often find myself as the only. You know, we put air quotes on that in many rooms. But I thank God for my parents every day, because they taught me that was to look at that as an advantage as opposed to a disadvantage. However, I do know that it is challenging, and there are barriers that many won't understand. But to answer the other part of your question, I wanted to go to space camp when I was a kid, and my parents didn't have the funding when I was younger to send me to space camp. And so I built my own space camp for kids who want to learn technology. And so our nonprofit organization, you're right, what we're doing is trying to let our children know that there's space that's been designed for them. It's designed for the way they think. It's designed for the energy they emote. It's designed for the way that they solve problems, and it's fun and exciting as well. And I love the fact that in this space, in the C3 initiative space, they're not the only. They get to see themselves fail. They get to see themselves succeed. And you know, my connection with GIS is I bumped into like-minded people who have that same passion along my journey of trying to push our kids, our children, our teenagers into the skill set. And I realized that I'm not the only. I'm surrounded by so many people who have the same passions and same excitement. And it makes me feel a little bit better every day when I go out there and do the work.
Appreciate that. You know, you said a couple of things that make me continue to think about this one. Some people who know me know that I do. As a kid, I used to do things that I would think of, that people would think of as weird. Like I would call out principles and just live by them. But one of them early on, you know, was just this idea that the one thing that we all have in common as human beings is that we are different. And when we are fully living our unique difference, then maybe we are the best. And then there's no one better than us. And so therefore we are all the best, provided that we can all like be our full selves. The full self language came later. But, you know, as I think about, you know, all of the kinds of intersections of difference that people might experience, especially in a US centered space where, you know, there's a lot of gender binary norms, there's white supremacy sort of in the space, and the idea that your voice has to sound a certain way and you have to speak a certain way. Kevin, you say you're of the West Indian diaspora, if I recall correctly. Christine, you have come from and through so many different parts of the world. I'm really interested to hear, like, what is your sort of take on this, Christine, who's always reminding us of the value of difference?
Thank you, Clinton. Oops, sorry. Thank you so much, Clinton. And I think that this is very, very important question for me, because you have to understand that I was born in Africa, And I first moved to France. And the difference between France and here is that unlike, I have always been the only one in my classroom. I live in Germany as well. Think about a Black girl in Germany in architecture school. I mean, that even makes it worse, right? So the idea is that, the difference was that in France or in Germany, I had to act like French. Because if I didn't, I wasn't even looked at. I had to fight to even be seen. If I came in there and spoke African or spoke French as an African, I was laughed at, So you basically have to come out of your shell and be somebody else. You end up walking in somebody else's shoes, living somebody else's life. Right? And basically being who you are not, because you have to force yourself to be somebody else. And that was really kind of how an extension of my life in Cameroon, in Africa, where I left my grandmother knowing who I was and learning French from somebody who told me who I was, right? So you continue that life of acting, not being who you are. I think that coming to America, in two ways, I think I had a double great experience with GIS, where I finally found myself, because GIS allowed me to understand how different and how powerful I was. And at that time, at that point, I didn't have to act as somebody else. I really found me, and I brought that me out. Another thing is when I was in, I found GIS when I was a professor of architecture. And the great thing was that in architecture, nobody does GIS. So it made me really kind of the powerhouse, where the wow effect of the GIS really made me like the person to go to. So it's really removed all of that being by myself in that space and made me, be on the pedestal. So really GIS saved me as a person. GIS allowed me to find me and become who I was and basically bring my difference out. And that's my story.
Yeah, I firmly believe that, and can relate. I feel like early in my career in IT, I also bumped into GIS, and making that transition in part was about leaning into something that was another thing that was very unique, and always presenting sort of as a young Black man was kind of an issue across all of those sort of intersections. Which is interesting as a young Black man. That man part doesn't always help, and so just leaning into that further, and then being that young Black man in GIS, was something that just enabled me to just own difference entirely. Ray, why don't you get in on this and share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks, Clinton. So, I mean, as a person who identifies as non-binary and Black from America, I have this very interesting experience also being GIS adjacent. And so for me, it's really, I found kind of home and space and just like taking up space wherever I go, sort of like what Dorothea said was, where she is where she belongs. And that rings true for me, even though I do have a different gender identity that some people might not like be familiar with. And so for me, it's really like building up spaces like this, like NorthStar and Blacks in GIS. And even like with the Esri UC this week and having sort of that queer space, like for folks in GIS who identify as queer or on the LGBTQIA spectrum is really like groundbreaking. And I think it's important that we continue to just show up as we are, and then everything else will follow. And so for me, it's important to just be, fully who I am, and like also continue to kind of navigate in these spaces and learn from other people who've been on this journey.
Appreciate that so much. Yeah, I was so glad to see so many spaces open up this year at the user conference, the Latinx space, the out in GIS space in particular, and all these spaces they had really great conversations. The Asian Daisy Pacific Islander space that just wrapped up just before we started. But we gotta get quickly to the capture of urban emotions. But before we do, I wanna give some time and space for people to talk about some of the things that they worked on through the pandemic. And Ray, as you know, like I'm just, the work that you all did created space and opportunity again, for the what was building towards an equity and social justice team at Esri to become, fully, boldly a racial equity and social justice team. So I really want you all, but I want to start with Ray. Talk about, your efforts, the efforts you've been a part of over the past couple of years, efforts related to the pandemic, efforts addressing racial disparities, and talk a bit about how that has helped you in your career and comfort and work, and helped other communities.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Clinton. So as I said earlier, I used to work for Milwaukee County government. And what Milwaukee County did was we were one of the first jurisdictions in the nation to declare racism as a public health crisis. And once that happened, we passed an ordinance in 2020, I think. The years are hard for me because of the pandemic. But anyway, we passed this ordinance to really solidify our work and bring Milwaukee County to a place where it could be the healthiest county in the state of Wisconsin, where I'm from. And so with that, COVID-19 happened, and we have some really smart people at Milwaukee County who worked to kind of model our dashboard off of the Johns Hopkins dashboard to show where those infections were kind of hitting hardest in our community. And so with the information we had, and also using like our declaration of, racism as a public health crisis in one of the most segregated communities in the nation, we showed COVID-19 infection rates leading with race and ethnicity data. And along those lines, our public health officers were really able to show that there's like health inequities that we all know, right, along racial lines. And we are able to use GIS and storytelling to really develop some of the language around like getting a COVID-19 test, and then eventually using that language to really showcase like where do people need to be tested, where do we need to put vaccine locations. And so in Milwaukee County, it really kind of gave us an opportunity to demonstrate, like put our money where our mouth was. Like we were saying racism as a public health crisis, but then COVID-19 really helped us to like amplify our work and really understand the narratives that we were telling and the stories that we were telling around race and racial inequities.
Appreciate that. And I think I can't stress enough how important it was for us. And I think I still have up on the screen this dashboard. Everyone knows about it. I didn't even pull this diagram, this image from Esri's platform. It's one of you go to Pexels, you can get this graphic. But the dashboard I was looking at, and I didn't even live in Milwaukee, was your dashboard in Milwaukee County, because it was a guide for other folks who wanted to step forward and address, first of all, understand and then address racial inequities. So really appreciate that. Dr. Padgett, I absolutely did miss you for the last question. Why don't you, first of all, as a professor, as a mentor to me, frankly, in your efforts just around GIS and at the UC to create space for connection and community for years as a part of a coalition of others. Why don't you talk a bit about, again, like what it's like to be the only, also in academia and in GIS, and what is it like, and what have you learned about navigating that space? And if you could like jam in some of the things that you worked on over the past 18 months, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I had somewhat of an advantage. I'm an only child, and one thing about only children is we're used to being by ourselves. So when I was working as the only African American in my section as a physical scientist in the 1980s, I was okay. I had all kinds of unbelievable racism thrown at me, very little support, actually the opposite of support. It was the Reagan era, when, the Reagan era was very anti-Black, extremely anti-Black. Not quite as anti-Black as the last 4 years, but it was really, then I went from there to Oak Ridge National Lab, where you could look around Oak Ridge Lab and try to find some Black people. You have to go off of the lab, but I was okay, navigated that. Then I went to the University of Florida, where I was the only African-American in my PhD degree program. But that was fine. We had a family of us in the McKnight Fellows program that took care of me. And then in the late, so that was the early 1990s. In the late 1990s, I started coming to ESRI, where I was one of very few Blacks. And so one of the things that I made note of was I started looking at the Esri UC internship programs. That the Esri has this program where you have student interns that work at the conference, and then they can participate in the sessions. And I looked at the photographs, and I didn't see anybody look like me for years. And I complained. I said, you can't tell me that out of these 50 interns that you find every year, no Blacks. But there was a brother named Todd Rogers, and he heard my complaint. I think he was like maybe the first Black Esri employee. He was there for a long time. And he made sure that from that point on, every year, that there were HBCU student interns. And so he was a person that was a real champion behind that and made that happen. Call it what you want, oh, it's the quotas, whatever it is, we're Black, we're at the conference. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. And then one year, a bunch of us HBCU faculty just happened to run into each other with our students in a subway. And we sat there and broke bread for like 3 or 4 hours. And we said, we need to do this every year. And then that's where the HBCU GIS social came from, that was at the top of the Hyatt, that went on from the early 2000s up until, I guess, this year. But it's been replaced by NorthStar and this is so great to see that this has come emerged out of that kind of casual, I guess that was kind of a homecoming and fellowshipping every year into a special interest group, and now this. So I commend you all for taking the baton and not just running with it, but just bursting through the finish line and going all the way with it.
We like to think of it not so much as taking the baton, but just like running to catch up with y'all and be a part of the movement. And hopefully we can always continue to work together and just broaden the spaces that we're providing around the conference and other times. Dorothea, maybe before we get into the presentation, do you want to respond to this question? Like, what have you been doing over the past 18 months? How have you had opportunities to do work that address the pandemic and or racial disparities and help communities?
Absolutely. So pre-pandemic, I had the opportunity to lead a social innovation project within Here Technologies, where we teamed up with the Greater Chicago Food Depository to address food insecurity in the Chicagoland area. So we used Here Location Services, geocoding, routing, and places search to provide a chatbot to help people facing food insecurities to locate food pantries, food resources in real time. And this was using their mobile phones. We helped the GCFD, which is Greater Chicago Food Depository, have data-driven capability. So when COVID hit and they had a real spike in the demand for food pantries and resources, they were able to use that data analysis to improve their strategies and also identify new locations for food pantries based on the number of requests. So pre-pandemic, they were delivering maybe 159,000 meals, and that tripled, doubled, quadrupled after COVID. So you can definitely follow the story on 360.here.com and many other Here technology, social innovation, and responses to COVID-19.
That's amazing. And I mean, I appreciate all the work that you all did, to help people. I always appreciate it when anyone takes time to do anything that has a positive impact on communities, because you can always do something that does that without any regard for impact to others. So any deliberate effort to make community better is something that I will always appreciate. I'm sorry, and for the sake of time, I want to move forward and turn things over to Dr. Wacta to share her project with all of us.
Thank you, Clinton. I'm sharing right now. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Beautiful. Oops, sorry. Thank you. So yes, I'm going to be showing you the app that I have developed. But before I start even showing you the app, I'm an architect. So I look at volume and what I see when I see GIS, I see how can you actually make it look solid. And this is kind of, some of a real estate, like the high spike where it's expensive, looking at solar calculation. That's how I look at those things. Usually when I look into GIS or data, I look at, what will my grandmother say if she's look at something like that? It wouldn't make sense. But if she look on the right-hand side, you understand that one is larger, that you have proportions here. That's really how I look at GIS. It's how do you actually start looking into things. And what I have been really interested in is the fact that we have so much data out there. We have more data than we have things to do with. And our information are being actually collected and used in ways that we cannot even touch. And we have handheld devices that are allowing us to actually, using artificial intelligence and advanced robotics, we're able to do a lot of different things. Scanning. And to me, all of that has been just using a tool to do things that are outside of us, not focusing on who we are. Even looking at this image here, is how do you use GIS? And we could, as a scanner, where you could actually look at what's out, what's inside. How do you look past just the visual that you're having? And those have been really all of the thing that I have been interested in doing with GIS. So I'm going to be looking at, the emotion. So I had to actually think about it and say, at the end of the day, all of those are just objects. We are people living in those objects. And usually, how we feel or how they make us feel, it's never recorded anywhere, because all of the tools that we have to record how we work, what we do, just basically suggest what they think we're doing. But nobody with our voice are not heard. And that's really why I started looking at, how do you use, those tools, handheld device, and give the user the power actually to get information and push the data out there without any filter, because a lot of time we know what filter does. So what I have done is really create something that is so flexible and so different, where any person could actually use, the first one here is looking at structure. So if you are in a city that has structure that you don't like or that make you feel a certain way, you'll see the emotion here will be neutral, sad, fear, mixed feeling. And what it is when you click at the button, it tracks, and you could track many different things, because working in one area, you could either be mixed feeling or be fearful. And when you're done, you could actually click and say why you are fearful. What's good about this is that you could actually use many different buttons at the same time and stop anyone when you want. So looking at the spatial utilization, I think that we live in a world that is so stressful, and all of those tools have not made our life any easier. In fact, those tools should actually make our life so easier that we don't have to do so many things and enjoy, but we don't do that. What are the areas, that make you, stressed? Some people are stressed when they have too many people, when there's nobody, and those are actually those things. So in all of this app, you have the first one is the point data. So anything that you could take a picture of. The second one is the line data. So you could track as you walk around and tell how you feel. The third one is an area. If you have an area that has an issue that you want to actually collect, and that does that. And also, I think that the city has a sound. So what are the sound of the space? How do they make you feel? Do they make you sad? Do they make you festive? Do they make you stressed out? What are those different things? Because in the end, we work in this environment, and the way we feel matters. And if we could actually make sure that the designer, it's really getting that information back of what they are doing, or what they are doing is not working, then we could actually have a layer of information that come not from a majority or minority, but a person, intimate person who is telling how they feel, and maybe we could actually understand how to design better. So these are different categories, and in fact, what it is anybody could scratch out those categories and pick what you want. You could actually just capture just 2 of those emotion, capture whatever makes sense to you. And those are actually how it's explained, how I explain it, like the urban soundscape, is it a kid? Is it a kid crying? Because if you think about all of those mixture, they create all of the environmental, quality that you either like or do not like. What are those quality? What is that space? And this is actually how those break down as well. So going further, this is actually just showing that, I'm giving the power to that individual to actually have their voice heard. So you have the power to pull anything down here and collect what you want and make sure that it is your voice, and it will specialize it right away, And this is actually a tour that I had around my house where you could actually see on those lines, you could have up to 5 lines. And this is the image, if this area doesn't make me feel right, then those dots are the picture that you could see here. And then it has note as well attached to it. And I think that then we could start specializing, looking at different things. How about Paris? I went to Paris for a week, and those were my trip, taking the bus, taking picture of many different places that made me feel either good or bad. And I think that what is good about this app is that it actually tell you how long you spend in that space, and how, what direction you were going, and all of those different things. And this actually shows some of the other different steps that you could have. One of the great things is also that, like, it tells you exactly how much time you spend in one space, so that you understand why you're spending more time in one space and why you're not in the other one. Because sometimes we act outside and we don't even realize why we're reacting that way. And when we look at those things, we could actually start understanding what area of the city is making us, empowering us, and what other area make us not feel right, And this goes with how I feel with any type of space as well. It could be through history, where you could actually start mapping how you feel in a space, looking at different collage. And one of the things that this has been able to do, this was an exercise that I did in a class with students, where we were able to actually locate area in the city where we had people who could not have access to grocery store. So using an infrastructure and creating a distribution where if something happened, they could actually be home and receive all of their goods. And those actually are things that we could do. So now I'm going to end here looking at this. If I ask you to tell me what you're seeing on this slide, everybody will look at a black dot, right? That's what I used to see, right? If I show you the next one, many black dots, right? Just dot, a dot, and a dot. But if I do this, there's a location. You could start telling me a story, right? Because we have a map, that location matter, and it's showing where I was born, right? That start telling me my story. And if I put this, it's telling you the story of me. It's mean location matter. So where we are matter, who we are matter, what we are matter. So that's why we have to actually make sure that we create those things. In fact, I was born in a little place at the middle of nowhere in Cameroon. We still don't have, road that go there, but it was the most beautiful space, and I still think it's the most beautiful place in the world. But it was a location that made me who I am. And it's because of that I have become who I am today. So location is the cause, and what we see is just a result of what it is. So if we start using GIS, we could start uncovering what we don't see. Let's stop focusing on what we see and focusing on what we don't see, because it's what we don't see that causes what we do see. And when I look at this picture, I look at, on the left-hand side, it's somebody using GIS, right? Because you have choice. You could pick what you want. You have the taste, the experience. On the right-hand side, if you are not using GIS, and that always comes when people ask me, where should we start? At the kindergarten. Because if you are not starting GIS at the kindergarten, you are chewing people food for themselves. So basically, everybody needs to use GIS. It's not about the field. It's not about, what you like or what you don't like. If you're not using it, you're letting somebody else chew your food. That's what I believe. And basically, I think that GIS is the X-ray for life. It is what we need to use. And if we're not using it, we're walking blindly. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Christine. Um, letting people chew your food. It's funny, but but it's also, sort of one of our themes for this year. When we entered into this year, we looked to Black History Month, and every year someone's setting the theme, and the theme this year is the Black family. And so we sort of put a map twist to that and just asked the question, who maps the Black family? Which is a challenge to everyone to consider. What is the impact of having, when we think about COVID-19 and so many other issues, where for so long people were not bringing racial equity into a conversation about health, which of course would have to have a health equity context. What is the impact of people when Black people are not at the table building these maps, solving these problems using geography and GIS, and what is the benefit? What do we gain if more and more Black people and other people from underrepresented groups are at the table, helping to design what analysis looks like and what approaches to solving problems look like, and how we tell stories about the world. I'm gonna shift over to the Q&A portion, and I'm gonna infuse some of the remaining questions that we had with some of the questions that folks left for us. And there's one fun question from Dr. Dawn Wright, who's dying to know what event or events Dr. Paget competed in track, and thinks that there's a neat connection between competitive athletics and success in GIS. And it would be great if Dr. Paget could comment on that.
Yeah, well, I ran long distance, 1,500, 5,000, and 10,000. It was funny when I was a kid running long distance in Baltimore. Every Black kid wants to be a sprinter. And so when I would step onto the track, talk about being I'm the only brother out there running a mile, 2 mile. And the fellows would be like, why you want to be like a white boy? Why are you running those white boy events? But, my father introduced me to Kip Keino, Henry Rono, Abibi Bikila, Merritt Yifter. All the greatest distance runners in the world are all African, bar none. And from the 800 on up to the marathon. So I'm like, and so fortunately, my parents made me more worldly and more aware of the world. So I wasn't, just trapped in that neighborhood in Baltimore where, everybody wanted to be a sprinter. And I didn't feel like some kind of an oddball. But in terms of athletics and being competitive, as an athlete, when you step on that track, you can't think about silver or bronze. I can't think about silver or bronze. I want gold, period. And, I tell my students that, and they're like, oh, Dr. Padgett, that's kind of harsh. Not everybody can be a champion. Not everybody can be a winner, But I'm like, look, I also own a consulting firm, Geomental, since 1992. And I tell my students, when I compete for a contract and I come in second, how much does second place pay? How much is that contract worth? I don't believe in losing. I don't believe in coming in second place. Now, if you can't win all the time and you lose sometimes, but at least we learn something from it. You bump your head, just learn, how can I not bump my head next time? And so being an athlete, I think really, one of my coaches said, the one thing about Paget is that he has a killer instinct. And and Serena Williams put it best. I heard a quote from her. She said, I hate losing more than I enjoy winning. And I said, that's me. And I'm trying not to be that way. I'm trying to just enjoy being out there and being blessed enough to have the talent to continue to run in the old man's category now. But anyway, I guess on to the next. Thank you, Dr. Wright.
I appreciate the idea of not competing for second place. Compete to be your best at the very least. If that ends up being second or third place or even last, is still a great accomplishment. Dr. Waka, if you could drop, I don't know if you have access to be able to respond in the Slido, but people are looking for information about how to reach you, your company info, how to learn more about your project. But if you drop some links into our internal chat, I'll make sure they make their way
I'll do that. Thank you. Appreciate
that. While we work towards that, also I want people to take note of the two surveys. There's the regular UC survey. There's also a homecoming survey. We want to understand the folks who are engaged in our networks. But maybe as we wrap up, Kevin, then Ray, then Dorothea, if you can share some thoughts on on the following. We like each of you to share just one thought on increasing equity and belonging in GIS. Feel free to share something about, something about the challenge itself, or why it's important, or an idea of how to take action, or something you've done, or advice that you would give allies.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Clinton. And if you would allow me, I'd like to go back to something you touched on, but we didn't really get a chance to discuss. Your comment about healthcare and not being at the table, especially in the face of the pandemic and some of those other things. What ends up happening when we're not at those tables is the solution that addresses the problems that we face become an afterthought of what's of the original solution that's placed out there, which is part of the reason why we at the C3 Initiative are working to get our children in skilled up, getting their skills up in GIS and in other facets of technology, so that they can become the owners of the intellectual property that facilitates the solutions. I'm a big proponent, and although the C3 Initiative is really focused on putting the skill sets in the hands of kids so that they can paint the solutions that they come up with, that are inside of their minds, I think it's so important. Most of the socioeconomic progressive opportunities for African Americans are lottery type systems. You are, whether it's the NBA, NFL, whether it's entertainment, you stand in a queue and you're one of 20,000, one of 3,000, like Dr. Paget, if you can't run faster than him, you missed out on that lottery opportunity to become a professional, player. And technology is just, GIS as well, is just not that. You can take that tool and you can create your own sandbox, and you can develop and you can create, and the solutions that are important to you and your community, your mothers, your fathers, your sisters, your brothers. I love what Dr. Wacta put together, that emotion, those emotions that are specific to us. We can be the plan A solution drivers for those types of issues as they affect us. And we're going to continue to push and do that at the C3 Initiative. I'm so excited to be partnered in community effort with all the individuals here. And I just think we have to step out of the space of, some of us can fight the fight of changing the systems and having them be redirected to support us. But some of us need to be on the forefront fighting to create our own and develop our own and answer our own problems and making our difference an advantage.
I've been horrible. I appreciate the potency and the on pointness of that response. I have been terrible though. We are 3 minutes over, and I'm happy to go until they kick us off. Ray, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think having spaces like this to encourage like equity and diversity and have these conversations is really critical to like how we move forward. And also I think as a like non-GIS expert, I think it's really critical that everyone really look at the world as like important, and their place in the world is very important. So I came into GIS as a writer, and I think there's something to that, to share these stories about where we come from and like where we're going. And so I think really no matter how you get to GIS, it's important and it's valued. And I think just continue to show up, and like be who you are. So thank you.
Appreciate it. I'm pushing the limit. They're about to kick us off. Dorothea, one real quick, did you have a response?
I love everything that was shared, especially building for us, by us. If you are interested in working with your organization to increase representation, there are ways to do it, working with your talent acquisition teams, recruiting, and definitely those in position to hire people leaders, equipping them with the information around bias, allyship, making mentorship and sponsorship available to all, and definitely understanding your data. For organizations, being transparent, and understanding where you are so you can improve for the future.